The airport was alive with the usual chaos of travelers rushing from one gate to another. Suitcases rolled across shiny floors, announcements echoed through the air, and people lined up for their flights with tired but hopeful faces. Among the many passengers that day was a man who looked no different from anyone else. He wore a plain black t-shirt, comfortable jeans, and carried a worn backpack over his shoulder. He didn't wear flashy clothes or expensive jewelry. He didn't even bring an assistant or bodyguard like most celebrities would. This man was Keanu Reeves, one of Hollywood's most loved actors. But on that day, if you had seen him walking through the airport, you might have mistaken him for an ordinary traveler. He stood quietly in line with everyone else, waiting for boarding to begin. Some passengers glanced at him and did a double take, whispering, wondering if it was really him. But others, especially the airline staff, didn't notice, or maybe they didn't care. To them, he looked too plain, too ordinary for someone about to enter the first-class cabin. When the announcement came for first-class boarding, Keanu didn't push forward. He didn't demand to be treated specially. Instead, he let a few other passengers go ahead of him. When it was his turn, he stepped forward politely, showing his ticket to the airline staff. That was when the first whispers started. One attendant looked him up and down, her eyes scanning his simple clothes. She smirked and whispered something to her colleague. They both laughed quietly, thinking he couldn't hear. "First class? With a backpack like that?" one muttered under her breath. Her voice wasn't loud, but the sharpness of her tone was clear. Another chuckled and said, "Maybe he got the wrong ticket. Looks more like economy." Keanu didn't respond. He only offered a small nod and a polite thank you as they scanned his ticket. But a few passengers nearby caught the exchange. They frowned at the staff's behavior. They knew exactly who he was, yet even if they hadn't, mocking a paying customer for his appearance was unprofessional. Keanu walked calmly down the jet bridge, keeping his head slightly lowered. He didn't walk with the swagger of a superstar. He didn't try to prove anything, he simply looked like a tired man heading to his seat. Behind him, more whispers followed. One staff member shook her head and muttered, "Some people really don't belong in first class." What the staff didn't know was that Keanu could have easily afforded to buy the entire row, or even the whole cabin if he wanted. But that wasn't who he was. He wasn't there to impress anyone. He was there to travel, just like everyone else. Inside the plane, the story continued. As he entered the first-class section, the contrast was clear. The cabin was filled with wealthy businessmen in designer suits, women in elegant dresses, and passengers dripping with luxury watches and bags. The staff greeted them with bright smiles, offering champagne and helping them with coats. But when Keanu stepped in, carrying his own backpack, the smiles faded. One attendant gave a half-hearted greeting and then quickly turned away. Another didn't even bother to ask if he needed help with his bag. Keanu didn't mind. He quietly placed his backpack in the overhead bin, making sure not to disturb anyone else. Then he took his seat near the window, settling in without a fuss other passengers in first class noticed. Some recognized him immediately, whispering excitedly to each other. "Isn't that Keanu Reeves?" one woman whispered to her husband. The man nodded, surprised. "Yeah, it is, but why are the staff treating him like that?" As Keanu adjusted in his seat, a flight attendant walked past carrying glasses of champagne for the other passengers. When she reached him, she paused for only a moment, then placed a plain bottle of water on his tray. She didn't even ask if he wanted champagne like the rest. She didn't offer a smile. Instead, she walked off, shaking her head slightly as if serving him was a chore. Keanu simply smiled and murmured, "Thank you," taking the water without complaint. He didn't seem angry or upset. He was used to people underestimating him because of his quiet nature. Still, the unfair treatment was clear to anyone paying attention. Nearby, a businessman in a sharp gray suit watched carefully. He knew who Keanu was, and he couldn't believe the staff didn't recognize him, or maybe didn't care. He noticed the little details. The way the staff's laughter followed Keanu from the gate to the cabin, the way they ignored him while fussing over others. It was subtle, but it was there. Keanu leaned back in his seat, looking out the window. As the rest of the passengers boarded, he seemed at peace, as though none of it bothered him. Yet the atmosphere in the cabin told another story. The staff's whispers and side glances created a tension. Some passengers shook their heads in disapproval. Others chose to stay quiet, not wanting trouble. As the plane prepared for takeoff, Keanu closed his eyes briefly. He didn't complain. He didn't ask for better treatment. He just existed in that moment, quiet and humble, completely unaware that what had happened during boarding was only the beginning of a story that would soon shake the airline to its core. Keanu settled into his seat in the first-class cabin. The leather was soft, the space wide, and the comfort was supposed to be unmatched. Yet the air around him felt heavy. He could feel the stares, not from admiration but from silent judgment. A few passengers nearby glanced at him with curiosity, as if they couldn't decide whether he belonged there or not. The flight attendants moved gracefully between the rows. Their smiles were bright and charming when they approached the wealthy passengers. One man in a sharp Italian suit was offered champagne almost the moment he sat down. Another woman wearing diamonds was treated with respect, the attendants carefully helping her stow her coat. But when it came to Keanu, the treatment was different. He received no warm greeting, no sparkling drink, not even a polite question about his needs. Instead, one attendant placed a plain water bottle on his tray table without even looking at him. It was clear she wanted to move past him quickly. Keanu, as always, remained calm. He gave a gentle smile and whispered a soft, "Thank you," even though the difference in treatment was obvious to everyone watching. The man in the gray suit sitting across the aisle noticed it immediately. He kept sneaking glances at Keanu, his mind racing. He recognized the actor. He knew the man sitting quietly by the window had starred in blockbuster films. He couldn't understand how the staff failed to see who he was, or maybe they simply didn't care. Keanu leaned back in his seat, adjusting his backpack under the seat in front of him. He didn't complain. He didn't call for the staff to demand champagne like the others. Instead, he quietly observed the world outside the small oval window. The runway stretched out in lines of glowing lights. The night sky was calm, and the city below sparkled as if it was unaware of the small drama unfolding inside the cabin. A mother entered the first-class section carrying a baby in her arms and struggling with a heavy carry-on bag. The attendants rushed to help other passengers with lighter belongings, but no one came forward to help her. She wobbled slightly, trying to lift the bag toward the overhead bin. Before anyone else could react, Keanu stood up, gently smiling at her. He lifted the bag with ease, tucking it securely in the compartment. The mother looked at him with surprise and whispered, "Thank you so much," Keanu nodded, his voice calm. "It's no problem, take care of your little one." He then sat back down as if nothing had happened, but a few passengers had seen this small act of kindness, and their eyes lingered on him a little longer. Some whispered to each other, trying to confirm his identity. Others just smiled quietly, touched by the gesture. Meanwhile, in the galley near the front, two attendants whispered to each other again. One said, "Did you see him? Helping with luggage like a porter." The other chuckled. "He doesn't fit in here, he looks like he's trying too hard." Their laughter was low, but cruel enough that the businessman across the aisle shook his head in disbelief. As the rest of the passengers settled into their seats, the flight attendants continued with their routine. Champagne glasses clinked, expensive wines were poured, and meals were described in detail to the wealthy travelers. But Keanu was skipped more than once. His menu was handed to him without eye contact, no explanation of the dishes, no polite introduction. It was as if they wanted him invisible. Keanu didn't let it bother him. He quietly scanned the menu, choosing the simplest option without a fuss. Then he placed it back neatly on the tray, waiting with patience while others enjoyed the exaggerated hospitality around them. The businessman sitting nearby grew more uncomfortable with each passing moment. He couldn't believe the unfairness. He watched as Keanu sat humbly, smiling politely even when ignored. He thought to himself, "This man has more grace in silence than these attendants do in all their chatter." As the plane prepared for takeoff, the lights dimmed slightly. The attendants moved down the aisles, checking seatbelts. One of them paused briefly at Keanu's. "Bro." She glanced at his seatbelt, gave a short nod, and walked away without a word. But for the passenger across the aisle, every small detail added to the picture he was forming. This was not just simple neglect. This was mockery wrapped in professionalism. Keanu shifted slightly in his seat, resting his hands on his lap. His posture was relaxed, his eyes calm. He didn't act like a star, didn't demand better treatment. Instead, he carried himself like any ordinary man. But the irony was clear. This was no ordinary man. This was a person who had touched millions of lives with his roles, his kindness, and his reputation for humility. As the engines roared and the plane began to roll down the runway, the cabin trembled with the power of takeoff. Keanu closed his eyes briefly, a faint smile resting on his lips. To him, this was just another flight, another journey. But to those watching, something larger was forming. The way he was treated, the way he remained kind in the face of mockery. It was planting a seed that would soon grow into a storm no airline could escape. The passengers around him exchanged glances. Some shook their heads at the attendants, some whispered quietly. Others looked at Keanu with admiration, seeing the grace in his silence. No one could have guessed then that these small moments, the ignored menu, the plain water, the lack of respect, would soon explode into a worldwide story that would cost the airline $500 million. As the plane climbed higher into the night sky, the mood in the first-class cabin became tense without anyone realizing it. The attendants moved with the same smooth efficiency, serving champagne, pouring wine, and arranging meals. But whispers and quiet laughter began to spread among them. It was small at first, a chuckle here, a smirk there, but soon it became noticeable to a few passengers nearby. Keanu sat quietly in his seat, eyes focused out of the window at the city lights far below. He didn't react. He didn't raise his voice. He simply adjusted his jacket and listened to the faint hum of the engines. But even in his silence, his presence seemed to irritate the staff. One young attendant nudged her colleague and whispered something. She pointed at Keanu, the words low but audible enough for the businessman across the aisle to catch. "Can you believe he's sitting here like he owns the place? Doesn't he know he's supposed to be normal?" The comment was followed by a soft giggle, and then another attendant joined in, leaning toward her friend and whispering, "I heard he doesn't even tip like other celebrities. Look at him, he's just quiet." Their tone was mocking, cruel in a casual way, meant to amuse themselves at someone else's expense. But the moment didn't go unnoticed. A few passengers turned slightly in their seats, their eyebrows raised, wondering why the staff would behave this way. Keanu, as usual, didn't show anger. He didn't frown. He simply sipped his water slowly. His calmness was like a mirror, reflecting their meanness back at them, without saying a word. The mother with the baby, sitting a few rows back, noticed the way he was being treated. Her small child giggled softly, reaching out, and she whispered under her breath, "Some people are so rude, even to kind people." The whispers of mockery grew louder, though still disguised as private jokes. The staff began to imitate him quietly, mimicking the way he adjusted his backpack, the way he sat with his hands folded neatly on his lap, and even the soft, polite nods he gave to other passengers when they thanked him. Some attendants held back laughter behind their hands, while others couldn't hide their smirks. A group of wealthy passengers noticed the behavior too. Their initial curiosity about Keanu had turned into concern. They watched as the staff continued their quiet performance, serving others with exaggerated bows, while treating Keanu with barely concealed disdain. One passenger whispered to another, "I can't believe they're doing this to him. He's not asking for special treatment. Just being polite." The other shook his head, staring at the cabin with disbelief. Keanu's calmness in the face of mockery only seemed to make the staff more irritated. One attendant tried to serve him a tray of food, deliberately sliding it past him as if to say, "Here, just accept it, don't expect anything more." But Keanu accepted it with grace, placing the tray neatly in front of him, unfolding the napkin and beginning to eat quietly. His actions were simple, ordinary, but dignified, showing more humanity than the mocking staff around him. Meanwhile, a flight attendant made the mistake of commenting loudly, without realizing. The microphone from the cabin intercom picked up some of her words. "I can't believe this guy thinks he's better than us," she said. Her voice, meant to be a whisper, carried just enough for several passengers to hear. A hush spread across the first-class cabin, eyes turning toward Keanu, who looked up briefly, smiling softly, still calm, still composed, refusing to be drawn into anger. The mockery had begun to backfire. Even among the staff, a few started to feel uncomfortable. One young attendant whispered nervously to a colleague, "Maybe we're going too far, he's still just a man." But the others were caught in the momentum, continuing their quiet jokes, their cruelty thinly veiled as humor, and the passengers began to notice the tension, feeling an uncomfortable weight settle in the air. Keanu, noticing the whispers and sideways glances, didn't make a scene. He continued to eat his meal with quiet manners, occasionally giving a polite nod to the mother with her baby when their eyes met. It was in these small gestures, simple kindnesses, that the contrast became clear. The mocking staff looked petty and small, while Keanu's quiet dignity shone brightly. The businessman across the aisle, who had been watching closely from the start, could no longer remain silent. He leaned toward the person next to him and said, "Do you see this? This is how they treat someone who's just kind and humble. Look at him. He hasn't said a word, hasn't demanded anything, and yet they act like he's beneath them." His voice was low but firm, carrying both disbelief and anger. Even the mother with the baby began to speak softly, to those around her, whispering, "It's wrong to treat anyone this way, even if he's famous, even if he looks ordinary. Even if we don't know him personally, he deserves respect." Small nods of agreement followed her words. The cabin slowly became a place of quiet observation, passengers watching in secret support, the mood shifting from passive curiosity to protective admiration. By the time the plane leveled off at cruising altitude, the mockery had spread throughout the cabin, no longer contained to just a few whispers. It had become a visible pattern, a series of small acts meant to humiliate. But the effect was the opposite. Instead of embarrassment, the staff's behavior highlighted the kindness and patience of the man they were mocking. A storm was quietly forming, small seeds of conflict that no one could yet see fully. Keanu leaned back in his seat, closing his eyes briefly, a faint, calm smile resting on his face. He could sense the negativity, but he refused to be a part of it. He didn't react with anger, didn't show frustration. Instead, he allowed his quiet strength, his simple humanity, to shine through. And unknowingly, he had already begun to inspire the passengers around him, people who would later play a part in holding the staff accountable for their behavior and ensuring that justice, in a very public way, would be served. The plane continued through the night sky, a vessel carrying not just passengers, but the unfolding story of a simple, quiet act of grace in the face of cruelty, a story that was about to become unforgettable, a story that would cost an entire airline millions because some people forgot that kindness cannot be ignored and humility commands respect. The atmosphere in the first-class cabin had grown tense. The laughter and whispers of mockery from the attendants had not gone unnoticed. A few passengers were clearly uncomfortable, but no one had spoken up yet. Until one brave passenger, a tall businessman with a sharp suit and an observant eye, finally decided that enough was enough. He leaned toward the nearest attendant, speaking quietly but firmly. "Is this how you treat someone just for being polite? Just for being quiet and kind?" The attendant, caught off guard, froze for a moment, her mouth opening slightly, but no words came out. The whispers stopped abruptly, and for the first time, the mocking staff realized that someone was watching. Closely, Keanu, seated calmly a few rows away, did not need to say a word. His quiet presence alone was enough to command attention. The calmness in his demeanor was powerful, almost magnetic, drawing eyes and respect without a single harsh tone. Another passenger, a woman traveling alone with her small child, decided to speak as well, her voice soft but full of determination. "It's wrong to treat anyone this way, especially someone who hasn't done anything to deserve this treatment." Her words floated across the cabin like a gentle wind, stirring awareness in the other passengers. Heads turned, eyes met, and the energy in the cabin shifted. What had been a quiet atmosphere of mockery was slowly becoming one of quiet judgment and support for Keanu. The staff realized their act of ridicule was no longer private. The jokes that once seemed harmless now felt exposed and wrong. The young attendant who had started the mockery looked nervously around, noticing the disapproving glances from the passengers. She could feel the tension rising, and the uneasy silence began to press down on her like a heavy weight. Her colleagues tried to hide it, but the discomfort was visible in their eyes. They were no longer laughing freely. The power dynamics had shifted, and for the first time the staff felt vulnerable. One of the senior flight attendants approached Keanu with a forced smile, attempting to regain control. "Sir, can I get you anything else?" she asked, her voice polite but her tone carried a nervous edge. Keanu looked up slowly, meeting her eyes with a calm, steady gaze. "No, thank you," he replied softly. "I'm fine." His words were simple, ordinary, but delivered with a dignity that made the attendant pause. She had expected defensiveness or anger, but instead, she found patience and quiet strength, and it made her uneasy. A passenger near the back who had been quietly observing leaned forward and spoke directly to the staff. "You can't treat someone like this just because you think they're different. He hasn't done anything wrong. He's just a human being like the rest of us." His voice was calm but carried authority. The cabin seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The staff shuffled slightly, unsure whether to continue or to stop. The power of collective judgment from the passengers was stronger than any training or rules they had been taught. Meanwhile, Keanu remained silent, but his calm eyes and composed posture spoke louder than words. Passengers began to nod at each other, small gestures of agreement, recognizing the unfairness that had unfolded in front of them. Even the mother with her child spoke softly to the attendants. "Please just treat everyone with respect." Her words were gentle, but they carried an undeniable weight. The staff could feel it, the moral pressure mounting, and with each polite reminder, the atmosphere became thicker with tension. The young attendant who had first whispered the mocking words now looked down at her hands, embarrassed. The laughter had died, and the cabin was quiet, except for the hum of the engines and the murmured voices of concerned passengers. Her colleagues glanced at each other, realizing that the fun they had been having had turned into something serious. They were no longer in control. The passengers were watching, and the quiet authority of Keanu's presence was undeniable. At that moment, a senior flight attendant finally intervened, addressing her team firmly. "Enough," she said. Her voice cut through the quiet tension like a knife. "We will not mock or speak ill of anyone on this plane. Focus on your work and treat all passengers with respect." Her words were strong, authoritative, and there was no room for argument. The staff nodded, some reluctantly, others with visible shame. The moment had shifted completely. From mockery to accountability, Keanu did not speak or celebrate. He simply adjusted his seat slightly, maintaining his calm, and continued to observe. His quiet dignity had caused a change that no words could capture. The passengers began to feel relief, a sense that justice, even small, had been served. The energy in the cabin was different now. Respect and admiration replaced tension and ridicule, and the flight, though long, carried a lesson about kindness, patience, and standing up for what is right. As the plane continued its journey through the night sky, the incident became more than a simple act of mockery. It became a moment of confrontation between cruelty and humanity, between casual arrogance and quiet strength. Keanu's calm, dignified presence had transformed the cabin, inspired the passengers, and humbled the staff. Without raising his voice, he had created a powerful example of patience and kindness, a reminder that respect is earned not through fear or mockery, but through simple human decency. By the time the flight reached cruising altitude, the confrontation had ended, but the impact remained. The staff worked more carefully, more respectfully, aware that the passengers were watching and that one quiet man had changed the mood of the entire cabin. Small acts of kindness, even in silence, had the power to confront cruelty, and in that moment, Keanu Reeves had reminded everyone on board what true dignity and humanity looked like. After the confrontation in first class, the plane felt different. The atmosphere was still charged, but now with a sense of awareness and quiet respect. Passengers exchanged glances, some whispering softly about what had happened. While Keanu sat calmly, his gaze forward, he seemed unaware of the ripple he had caused, but the staff could feel it, the weight of accountability pressing down on them. They no longer laughed behind their hands or whispered jokes about him. The humiliation of the mockery had shifted, and for the first time they felt vulnerable. Back in the crew cabin, the young attendant who had started the mocking was shaking slightly. She sat in a corner, avoiding eye contact with her colleagues. Her fingers fidgeted nervously as she replayed the moment over and over in her mind. Every laugh, every whisper, now seemed foolish and wrong. She could feel a pit of guilt growing inside her. She had underestimated one man's quiet strength. She had thought it was harmless fun, but now the weight of her actions felt crushing. The senior flight attendant called the team together, her face serious, her voice carried authority, and no one dared to interrupt. "This behavior is unacceptable," she said firmly. Her words echoed in the small space, and the team listened in silence. She went on, "You must treat every passenger with respect. There is no room for mockery, for gossip, or for personal judgment. Keanu Reeves is just one of many passengers, but the lesson here applies to everyone." Her words were simple, yet they hit like thunder. The staff nodded, some quietly, others with visible shame, and the lesson sank in. Meanwhile, the passengers continued to talk quietly among themselves, sharing small details of the incident. Each story painted a picture of the courage and quiet dignity Keanu had shown. Even people who had not witnessed the mockery firsthand felt the impact. They admired the way he had handled himself without anger, without shouting or creating a scene. His calmness had spoken louder than any words ever could. A couple sitting across the aisle from him whispered to each other, "Did you see how calm he was? Not a single word of anger, just dignity." The mother with the child nodded, her small hand gripping her child's tightly. "It's incredible," she said softly. "He didn't even yell, but he made them stop." Their voices carried admiration and a sense of relief. They were witnessing something rare, the power of quiet authority and true human decency. Word began to spread beyond first class, quietly reaching the rest of the passengers. Even the economy section passengers heard snippets of the story. They watched in awe as Keanu Reeves remained calm, a silent force of respect and integrity. The atmosphere of mockery had dissolved entirely, replaced with whispers of admiration and small smiles of approval. What had started as an unpleasant experience became a lesson in kindness and patience. The staff began to feel the consequences too. The realization that their behavior was not acceptable weighed heavily. Some tried to rationalize it as a joke, but the discomfort in the cabin was undeniable. The look in the passengers' eyes, the quiet judgment, and the way Keanu had remained composed. It all reminded them of their mistake. No amount of training had prepared them for being humbled in such a quiet but powerful way. The flight continued, and the fallout was not just emotional. It began to affect the way the staff performed their duties. They became more attentive, more careful, and more respectful. Every interaction with passengers now carried a subtle tension. The fear of repeating a mistake lingered in their minds. They had learned that kindness and respect were not optional. Even the youngest attendant, who had mocked him first, now approached her work with seriousness, her eyes occasionally glancing toward Keanu, a quiet acknowledgement of the lesson he had silently taught. Some passengers quietly recorded small parts of the interaction on their phones, not to mock but to remember, to share later as an example of human decency and humility. Keanu's calm demeanor became a story in itself. The way he had handled humiliation without anger inspired more than just the staff. It inspired the passengers, who realized that true strength often lies in silence, in dignity, and in the quiet assertion of respect. By the time the flight crew served the next round of meals, the tension had turned into a cautious calm. Staff moved with care, making sure each passenger felt respected, each tray delivered politely, each question answered with patience. The atmosphere had shifted completely, from mockery and arrogance to awareness and accountability. And all of it because one man had chosen to remain calm, dignified, and respectful in the face of unkindness. The passengers continued to observe, quietly, many exchanging subtle smiles or nods, recognizing that something remarkable had happened on this flight, a lesson in human behavior, in humility, and in the power of kindness. Keanu remained composed, as if unaware of the ripple he had created. Yet everyone around him could see it, the change in energy, the respect he inspired, and the quiet correction of wrongs that had seemed so harmless at first. By the end of the flight, the impact was undeniable. The staff, once mocking and careless, had been humbled. The passengers, once silent, had become witnesses to an extraordinary lesson, and Keanu Reeves had shown, without a single outburst, the true strength is in calmness, dignity, and the quiet assertion of respect. The fallout was more than punishment for bad behavior. It was a transformation, a reminder that one person's kindness and patience can ripple through an entire cabin, changing attitudes and teaching lessons that words alone could never convey. As the plane touched down, the story of what had happened in first class was already beginning to spread. Some passengers discreetly posted on social media, sharing small details about the incident with Keanu Reeves. They described the mockery they had overheard, the quiet courage he had shown, and the way the flight attendants had been humbled. Within hours, the posts began to gain attention. Likes, shares, and comments piled up quickly. The story resonated with people because it was about kindness, dignity, and respect. Everyone wanted to know how the famous actor had reacted to a situation that could have embarrassed anyone. Journalists and bloggers soon picked up the story. The online world buzzed with curiosity. Many outlets wrote about the incident, highlighting the contrast between the careless behavior of the airline staff and Keanu's calm, dignified response. Headlines appeared like, "Keanu Reeves teaches first-class lesson in kindness," or "How one actor silenced mocking airline staff." The story spread fast because it was unusual, heartwarming, and showed that true celebrity was not about fame or money, but about character, integrity, and the quiet power of respect. In offices, homes, and cafes, people discussed the incident. They shared it as a lesson in behavior, often saying, "We all could learn from this." Some parents used it to teach children about humility, patience, and dignity. Others discussed it in business meetings, pointing out how leadership and respect can change an entire environment. Even people who were not fans of Keanu Reeves found themselves admiring the way he had handled the situation. The story became more than just an airport incident. It became a viral example of human decency. The airline could not ignore the story. The management soon received emails and calls from journalists asking for explanations. The company realized that the incident could affect its reputation significantly. Public relations teams scrambled to respond. They had to explain why their staff had behaved poorly and how they would fix it. The news spread further when bloggers and YouTubers posted commentary. Using clips from the flight or stories from passengers, the airline's mistakes were laid bare, while Keanu's reaction was praised universally. Meanwhile, social media influencers began creating short videos about the story. They highlighted his calm, patient responses, comparing them to the arrogance and rudeness of the staff. Viewers commented on how inspiring it was. Many admitted they wished they could handle such situations with the same grace. Some even jokingly asked, "If I were in first class, could I be this calm?" The incident became a trending topic, and hashtags like #KeanuKindness first-class lessons started appearing everywhere. The story had captured global attention, reaching millions of people. News channels invited experts to discuss it. Psychologists explained why Keanu's response was powerful. They said it showed emotional intelligence, the ability to control anger and turn an uncomfortable situation into a lesson without confrontation. Business leaders talked about leadership lessons, saying that how he handled it was more influential than any shouting or punishment could have been. Every discussion reinforced the idea that kindness and dignity are stronger than anger, mockery, or power. The airline staff watched the growing media storm with fear. The ones who had mocked him felt the weight of the story reaching far beyond the plane. Their names were not revealed, but everyone could imagine the embarrassment and consequences. Management began internal investigations, promises of training, and accountability were made. The staff realized that the lesson Keanu had quietly taught in first class was now being amplified worldwide. It was no longer a personal lesson, it was a public example. Keanu Reeves himself noticed some of the coverage. Though he remained humble, he understood the story had a bigger impact than he ever expected. Fans praised him for his patience and humanity, saying he had set a perfect example for everyone. Some messages flooded in from people who said they had changed their perspective about kindness, respect, and the power of staying calm in difficult situations. It became clear that the small act of dignity on a single flight had created a ripple effect far beyond the plane. Even passengers who had been quiet during the flight felt pride in having witnessed it. They shared their experiences in interviews, podcasts, and social media, each retelling added small details. But the core message remained the same. Keanu Reeves had shown that respect, patience, and calmness could influence everyone around. The story inspired other celebrities to speak about kindness. Some airlines started reviewing staff training, emphasizing customer respect, empathy, and emotional intelligence. The media coverage turned what could have been a negative incident into a global lesson in human behavior. By the end of the week, the story had gone viral internationally. Millions of people had seen it, commented on it, and shared their opinions. The mockery on the plane became a distant memory, replaced by admiration and respect for the actor who had taught a silent but unforgettable lesson. The airline faced embarrassment, but also the opportunity to improve. While the world celebrated the quiet power of decency and the influence of one man's calm courage, the incident proved that a single act of patience, dignity, and kindness can make headlines, change behavior, and inspire millions at the same time. The story of the flight spread across the world like wildfire. Within days, every major newspaper, TV channel, and online platform had covered it. People from all walks of life reacted strongly. Some were shocked that airline staff could treat any passenger that way. Others were amazed at how Keanu Reeves, a world-famous actor, responded with calm and humility instead of anger. The reactions kept pouring in, turning the small incident on a plane into a global discussion about kindness and respect. Fans from around the world flooded social media with messages of admiration. They shared stories of their own encounters with Keanu, stories that painted the same picture, a man who was kind, gentle, and humble despite his fame. One fan wrote, "I met him once in a bookstore. He carried his own books to the counter and thanked the cashier like she was the most important person in the room." Another fan shared, "He gave up his subway seat for me years ago in New York. I'll never forget it." These stories strengthened the narrative that Keanu wasn't just acting calm on the flight. This was who he truly was. Celebrities joined the conversation too. Many praised his dignity. Some called him a role model. A few even admitted they might not have had the patience to react the way he did. One actor tweeted, "Respect to Keanu Reeves. That's what real strength looks like." Another said, "He handled it better than I could have. Hats off to him." The global admiration grew larger, and soon, his name trended for weeks across different platforms. Meanwhile, the airline faced massive backlash. Customers began canceling their tickets, refusing to fly with a company that allowed such treatment. Stockholders demanded answers, and critics wrote harsh columns about the company's culture and staff training. The hashtag boycott the airline spread quickly, forcing the airline into full damage control. They issued public apologies, promising better training and strict policies against unprofessional behavior. But for many, the damage was already done. Business experts on TV explained how a single mistake could destroy customer trust. "This isn't just about one flight," said a financial analyst. "It's about values. If an airline cannot respect people, they lose not only passengers, but also reputation. And reputation is priceless." Investors began pulling out, and soon the company reported losses running into hundreds of millions, all because they underestimated the power of dignity and how quickly one act of mockery could spiral out of control. At the same time, ordinary people everywhere used the story as a lesson. Parents told their children about Keanu's behavior, encouraging them to be calm and kind even in unfair situations. Teachers discussed the incident in classrooms, using it as an example of emotional intelligence. Community leaders shared the story in meetings, emphasizing respect for others, no matter their appearance or status. It became more than just a celebrity headline. It became a moral story retold across the world. For Keanu, the global reaction was overwhelming. Yet he did not take advantage of it. He didn't do interviews bragging about his behavior. He didn't demand credit or rewards. Instead, when reporters approached him, he only said, "I just did what felt right. Everyone deserves respect, even if they don't give it to you first." His quiet response only deepened people's admiration, proving once again that his humility was real. Even airline employees from other companies began speaking up. Some said the incident had forced their companies to change policies. "We've started new training sessions," one employee revealed. "We're told to treat every passenger with respect, no matter who they are, and honestly, that's how it should have always been." The ripple effect was clear. Keanu's calmness had triggered changes far beyond a single flight. The story also caught the attention of charity groups, inspired by the way Keanu handled himself. Some organizations invited him to speak about kindness and respect. He declined most offers politely, but instead quietly donated to causes that promoted human dignity, worker fairness, and respect in the workplace. His actions spoke louder than words, continuing the message he had already shown on that plane. In homes across the world, families still talked about it weeks later. "Did you hear about what Keanu Reeves did?" was a question that sparked conversations over dinner, at coffee shops, and in offices. People compared his reaction to how they might have acted. Many admitted they would have lost their temper, shouted, or demanded justice immediately, but they admired the way he chose patience instead, and many promised themselves to be calmer and kinder in their own lives. The airline's financial fallout continued. Reports estimated losses of nearly $500 million as investors walked away. Experts called it a 500 million lesson in kindness. The phrase became popular online, reminding companies and individuals alike that respect cannot be overlooked. Some even joked that Keanu Reeves had taught the world's most expensive lesson in patience. But behind the humor was a serious truth. His quiet response had changed attitudes on a massive scale. In the end, the global reaction turned the entire incident into something much larger. It was no longer just about one actor on one flight. It was about humanity, respect, and the reminder that even the smallest actions can inspire great change. From social media trends to boardroom discussions, from classrooms to families, Keanu Reeves had unknowingly sparked a worldwide movement, proving that humility and kindness, even in silence, can leave an impact far stronger than anger or revenge. Time passed, but the story of the flight and Keanu Reeves's calm dignity did not fade. It became one of those rare moments that people continued to remember, retell, and share, not because it was dramatic or loud, but because it carried a quiet lesson that touched millions of hearts. The incident had begun as a simple flight, a few careless jokes by airline staff and one man's patience, but it had grown into something much bigger. The airline never fully recovered, despite their apologies, new training programs, and attempts to rebuild trust. The damage was too deep. Investors had walked away, and passengers had chosen other airlines. Every time someone booked a flight, the story lingered in the back of their minds. Do I want to fly with the company that mocked Keanu Reeves? The answer for many was no. Analysts called it a $500 million mistake. But more importantly, people called it a lesson. One that showed how a single moment of cruelty could destroy years of reputation. For Keanu Reeves, life went on as usual. He continued acting, attending events, and quietly supporting charities. But people now looked at him differently. To many, he wasn't just an actor anymore. He was a symbol of kindness and dignity. He showed the world that fame didn't mean arrogance, and that silence could be more powerful than anger. Fans admired him not only for his movies, but for his character. Parents pointed to him as a role model for their children, reminding them that true strength isn't in shouting the loudest, but in staying calm when treated unfairly. Passengers from that flight often spoke about the experience. In interviews or casual conversations, they described what it felt like to witness it firsthand. One said, "I was there. I saw how they mocked him, and I saw how he just smiled. It changed how I think about patience, another shared. I realized that day that respect doesn't come from wealth or status. It comes from how you carry yourself, and Keanu carried himself with grace. These testimonies kept the story alive, giving it more weight and authenticity. Around the world, the story was used in schools, workplaces, and training programs. Teachers told it in classrooms as an example of humility. Business leaders used it to train their employees about customer respect. Motivational speakers mentioned it in their talks, showing how one man's calmness changed an entire airline industry. The story had become more than gossip. It had become a teaching tool. Even within the airline industry, changes happened. Companies quietly reminded their staff that respect should never be conditional. They introduced stricter codes of conduct, emphasizing that every passenger deserved fair treatment. The fear of repeating such a public mistake lingered like a shadow, and though it came at a high cost, the legacy of the incident improved how people were treated in flights around the world. Keanu himself never tried to use the story for attention. When journalists asked about it, he always gave the same quiet answer. I just believe everyone deserves respect. Those words became quoted everywhere, printed on posters, written in articles, and repeated by fans. They were simple words, but they carried power. They reminded people that respect is not something you earn only through wealth, power, or fame. It is something every human being deserves. The legacy of the lesson was also personal. Many people reflected on how they might have acted in Keanu's place. Some admitted they would have shouted, demanded justice, or even left the flight. But his calmness inspired them to think differently. They realized that patience and dignity often leave a stronger mark than anger. In homes, offices, and schools, people repeated the lesson, promising themselves to try and handle unfairness. With more calm and kindness, the airline staff who had mocked him faced consequences. Some lost their jobs, others went through heavy retraining. But even they admitted later that the incident changed them. One former attendant confessed in a private interview, "I regret what I did. I learned the hardest way that words matter. I'll never forget it." Though painful, it showed that even those who made the mistake could grow from it. The lesson reached everyone: passengers, staff, management, and even the world at large. In the end, the story was remembered not as a scandal, but as a reminder of human decency. People didn't talk about the mockery as much as they talked about Keanu's response. That was the true heart of the story. The way he stayed calm, the way he smiled politely, the way he showed respect even when he wasn't given any, that was what left the deepest mark. Years later, people still shared the story online. Someone new would discover it and post, "Did you know Keanu Reeves once taught an airline a lesson? Worth $500 million, and he did it without saying a single angry word?" The comments would flood in with admiration. People continued to find hope and inspiration in it, proving that real stories of kindness and humility never die. The legacy of that flight was simple but powerful. It showed the world that kindness is not weakness, patience is not silence, and respect can change everything. Keanu Reeves had not only taught an airline a costly lesson, but he had also reminded the entire world of something we all too often forget: that being human means treating others with dignity, no matter who they are. And so the story lived on, a $500 million mistake for the airline, but a priceless reminder for humanity. That day in first class became more than a headline. It became a symbol, a lesson passed down, a legacy of kindness that would inspire generations to come.